Good morning, good afternoon, good day, whatever's going on for you all. Welcome to day two of the Gamers 2022 Professional Bootcamp, brought to you and presented by Belong Gaming Arenas. We are so excited here. Day one was fire. We had so many amazing conversations, from branding to hearing from our co-founders to hearing about streaming and all of the things. And we're super excited for what is going to happen today. I am Verta Maloney. I am one of the co-founders and chief innovation officers here at the Gamehurst. And I am so excited to jump right into an amazing panel with some amazing humans around women building the metaverse and beyond. And so we're super excited for all of the panels that we have and the discussion that will be going on today. I'm like a little all over the place. Sorry. I'm hopped up on coffee and just like getting into it. So I am joined today by Ahna, and Ahna is one of the first employees over at Double Labs and has been in the metaverse before we even started having this conversation about the metaverse, and has this great talent for making anybody feel comfortable in any space. We got to meet IRL in Austin at South by, so I'm really excited for this conversation today. And I'd love for you just to introduce yourself to our wonderful, wonderful guests. Not guests, you're the guest. Wonderful audience. What are you doing in the world? What are you doing in the world?
Yeah, so I'm currently the Chief Experience Officer at Double A Labs, as she mentioned. And so I'm really, we were historically kind of a live events company, but we always had technology that really drove our business. And what does technology look like with live events? And we have always kind of specialized in gaming and entertainment. And I'm not necessarily a gamer by, general life. I appreciate it. I enjoy it, but I just kind of really love the culture that came with it. And so with that, now we've continued to look at the idea of like, how do we bring gaming and that idea of culture and community to real life through a metaverse-esque platform. And so we're building that out. So my role right now is overseeing both live events production side, and then also what we're building as a product, and then how do the two actually kind of meet. So it's a lot of real world and digital colliding a lot in my life. Yeah. So trying to figure out what zone am I in today?
I know, right? Like, oh, who am I today? What space am I in? Okay, so the first question that I'm going to ask, because this is a professional boot camp, is if you had one thing to share with your younger self as you started your first job ever, what would you tell your younger self? What would you tell younger Ahna?
It's a good question. I think in a lot of ways, it's okay to not know the answer to things. So often, and this might just be my personality, I need the answer. It's like, do I fake it till I make it? Like, what does that really look like? And so for me, I am trying to let myself know that I don't have to have the answer. I was sitting in a investor meeting the other day, and someone said something that I didn't know. And like, I didn't want to raise my hand, or I didn't want to be like, can you clarify that for me? So I'm just like, assuming that I knew the answer. And then I get out of the meeting and I'm quickly like, Google, like, what do you mean? And so it's okay to not have the answers, especially coming into, new parts of where people are creating. Like when you talk about the metaverse, or when you talk about, going for a seed round, or all those type of things. It's okay not to have the answers, because someone had to do it first to figure out the answers. And so you're in that same spot. And so how do you collaborate with other people and get those answers is kind of really what I wish I would have asked and known a lot earlier than trying to make it. So.
I think it's a great one. I think it's a great one to start off with when we're thinking about, one, the metaverse, right? I'm going to use air quotes because we're going to talk a little bit just even about like what that means to us, what that's meaning now versus what it meant before. And I think it's really important, one, as an organization that centers women and femme identifying folks and just other genders that are, historically marginalized within the space. Not knowing can like come at such expense to us sometimes, right? Or not appearing like we have all of the answers. And for our male counterparts, that's not always the case. So I think it's really important to put that out there so that people realize that it's like a heavy burden. But like you said, Google has a lot of answers, but sometimes you just have to say, I don't actually know what you're talking about, right? The land of acronyms and all the things that come up. And so I do want us to hop in to talking about how you would define this term metaverse. And I think it's interesting because we've been here before.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we learn from lessons? And I just kind of want us to like root this in what it is in our lived experience and just like some key definitions. I'm going to share just a definition of what I found. This is from therap.com, and it just basically said that the metaverse is a virtual reality world where users can interact, game, and experience things as they would in the real world. Using current AR and VR tech, they can immerse themselves into worlds and interact with overlaying objects and people and such, right? So that's kind of like this I don't know, basic definition that's out there. How would you define the metaverse just based on your experience to date and just like where we stand today in 2022?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they hear the term metaverse, they automatically think, Ready Player One. If you've read the book or seen the movie,
Of
I
course. I mean, I
loved
would
it.
say of course, but I have.
I mean, I thought the book was better than the movie personally, but that was just me. And so people have this idea of, and especially with Facebook and Meta promoting this idea of the Oculus, like everyone thinks like, or Joe Schmo, I shouldn't say everybody thinks that, the metaverse is this like 3D world that I'm always in a headset and all of that. But in reality, we're nowhere near that vision of what it could be in the future, right?
Yeah.
There's not enough adoption for VR right now in the general public. So that takes a huge chunk of people that would even be able to, interact with this concept or an idea. But in reality, the metaverse for us as a company and the way we think about it is we want to begin to build bridges and showing people that there's new ways of interacting. When you're scrolling through a website, it's a singular experience. You are, purely just clicking on links, jumping around from hyperlink to hyperlink in all these different areas. But what the metaverse would allow us to do is, if I clicked on a link, what if something else happened, right? What if it created more of a game? What if it allowed you to be there next to me where we're doing it together instead of a singular experience? How do I build this idea of a community and education in a more kind of immersive, dynamic way of looking at things versus everything being flat and 2D? And so it's these concepts and ideas that are really building what people want to be the metaverse, which eventually could get into, that 3D world where you're walking around as an avatar. But we right now find that, people spend more time creating a 3D avatar to get into, an Oculus game or get into, is my hair okay? Do I like this shirt? Is this the right color for me? Versus looking at the content in the world and what people are paying for from a business perspective or, as a business trying to run, they want people to get in there and play the content and to interact with the content. And so how do you find a balance right now to educate people that it's just a more immersive way of thinking about understanding content and it's not this giant 3D, kind of world, or it doesn't have to be. They're all different levels of the metaverse as we talk about them today.
I want to get into the levels, but I really appreciate what you're saying about it's almost like what we see in the movies versus what the real deal is right now and what we can actually do. And so I do think sometimes what we see and what's presented to us, we see a very cleaned up version of these avatars that people are creating and don't understand all of the things that go behind just creating that one experience. And so I want to dig into that a little bit more. And then this access question. And you just mentioned like we're not yet at the place where everyone has an Oculus. Everyone can't even afford one. I don't have one. I want one. Hey, people out there, you could give one to everyone that's been on any single panel that for Bootcamp. Like we would love that. But access, right? Little small one. Just access is key. And so before we dig in a little bit more, we are able to bring our next panelist up. And Keisha is going to join us. Keisha has been in the game for like ever. If you were to go and look in any book for the definition of Black futurist, it is going to be a magical image of Keisha from Sugar Gamers that should pop up right next to that definition. I have been fangirling for like ever and finally got to meet you in person this like couple days ago, actually, at the Games Beat Summit. And so we're going to spend more time together. But Keisha, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so excited to have you joining us. So just tell the people, what are you doing in the world? And think about this question while you're telling us what you're doing in the world, which is, what would you tell younger Keisha? Like, what words of advice or what things would you say to yourself when you were starting your very first professional job? So one, tell the world what you're doing out there.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I equally fangirl for you and the Gamers. What all of you are doing is amazing. So in 2009, I started a company all about inclusiveness. I really wanted to understand why I wasn't seeing certain faces and hearing certain voices in the gaming industry, especially considering how big of an impact video games have had in my life, teaching me critical thinking. I can attest I can attest my reading comprehension and my team playing skills to video games. So it's a very important part of my life and a very important core sort of foundational element of what Sugar Gamers is.
Yeah.
And if I had a chance to go back and talk to my younger self, it would definitely be a conversation about starting now. When I was younger, I always thought I had to wait. I always thought I had to be validated externally by someone else, by someone with more authority, a teacher figure, or, something else that was smarter than me, better than me, older than me. And because of that, I never looked within to, sort of validate myself and my own and pursue my own curiosities. And that was a thing that I realized when I got older, oh, I can't wait for anybody to tell me that I'm good enough.
Yeah.
I can't wait for anybody to tell me that I'm ready. That's something that has to come from within, because if you're waiting for other people, you're going to wait a long time.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And it's so connected to the whole thing about you don't have to have all the answers, right? Because I think some of that is about waiting for that validation is really connected to thinking, well, if I don't have the answer, then no one's going to validate all the things. It's like this spiral. So I'm excited for you two to be connected, for all of us to be connected, because I just think there's going to be so many other things that come from this, right? The beyond part of this panel. And so Ahna and I were just talking about defining the metaverse, what it is. And I would love to hear you share a little bit, because so one of the things I'll say about Keisha is that you've always been forward thinking. I just think that that's also a part of why it's hard to get the validation. I think sometimes people are just like, oh, I'm not going to curse. Oh my, she's on some other ish. What is she talking about? Because it's so brilliant and amazing. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you define the metaverse.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that you guys defined it just a moment ago, but it's just a system of interconnected digital, spaces, e-commerce, and experiences that, we're all supposed to be in. Right now, I think that, at least for me, as I've seen it, it's still pretty speculative, and we're still sort of forming what that is. So those of you out there who believe that you're missing out, you're not, not yet. The metaverse and ideas about the metaverse have existed for decades. Yeah. And the metaverse that is becoming popularized now is something we're going toward it, but we're not quite there yet. Yeah. So, which is exciting. And also it's kind of difficult to wade through all the different media information, all the things that are bombarding us. It makes us have FOMO, right?
So, and I think that's a really important thing. So the ability to operate, obviously, I think both of you do this in your work in a space that's undefined. Right. And figuring out where do you want to go next and what do you focus on is really hard and key. And I'm definitely the queen of not being able to focus. So I'm curious what you would say to people out there that are really interested in the metaverse or interested in just being a part of this moment. What should they learn or do right now, right? So if there's one or two things that, if this is just something you're here at this panel and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm missing out, and I'm really not. What are one or two things that they should learn or do or kind of just get engaged with right now?
I mean, for me, I would definitely say take a deep breath, because learning about the metaverse and just being in emerging technologies at all, right? Video games is one thing, and video games spans this history where you can be a retro gamer, you can be in esports, and you can do all these things. Metaverse is another slice that is going to require consistent and continued learning. It's not like there's some guy out there that knows everything about the metaverse and that's it. Like, don't believe it. So it requires consistent and diligent learning and curiosity, right? So the metaverse can be any number of things. The metaverse can be what you contribute to it, what you make of it, and you have to learn what that is for yourself, right? The metaverse touches transformative technologies and self-help and self-care. The metaverse does touch video games. The metaverse does touch fashion and e-commerce. There's just so many different things there. But yes, that continued learning. So like wherever you are now, wherever you start, just continue, make it exciting for yourself. And then also be careful. There are a lot of ethical sort of conflicts going on in these conversations, and you have to be very diligent about not being misguided in this space, because there's so many like money flips. There's so many like, oh, you get in here right now and you're going to make a lot of money. You're going to be famous. Don't calm down. It'll be there later. So
I love that. I got 3 C's out of that. So I'm like all about, the 3 C's from Keisha: consistent, continuous, and be curious, right? And then also just like be cautious. So the 4 C's. Yeah, I think that's a C. Ahna, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think all those are really valid points to make. When I start thinking about how we even got into it, it's just a lot of reading articles from people who are thought leaders within this space, right? So again, Meta has their own version of it, and that type of thought leader with 3D. And then you have, people who are looking at it from a consumer product perspective. Like we've been talking with groups at Nike, and like, what is their vision of how they, of a metaverse of their products, of how people experience, sneakerheads, right? How do they see those products differently, right? And so I think a lot of it is just like educating yourself with different views and trying to see like, what does it mean to you? Because as she mentioned, there is no one person that's just like the authority and they wrote the book and you're doing it, right? We're kind of building this plane as we're flying it. And so it's like, how do we all come together and just making sure that what we're building is working together instead of against each other, right? So one thing we talk a lot about is like, the ecosystem of what the metaverse could be, right? So you have like certain video games are what we would consider like a closed ecosystem, right? Like Fortnite, right? You can only build in Fortnite. You can only use what they give you. You're limited to what Epic allows you to build in it. So that's closed. But what most people are looking for is this idea of an open thing where I can have e-commerce from over here. I can bring in my favorite tool from over here. Our company specifically uses this, right? And creating this world that is everything that you want it to be and that you are actually going to use versus someone forcing you to use one particular program because it's part of their package and their bundle, right? So how do we create this kind of like open ecosystem? And then what is it going to take to actually get there? Yeah. And these are all just conversations that we're having, and people are trying and then saying, nope, that's not working. Let's take that back. Let's try to do that piece, right? And so it's this continual, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of concept when it comes to what we're building and what it's going to look like. And is it going to be done in 5 years? I don't know. Like this what is the final definition of what this is going to be? And then ultimately it has to be usable, right? Yes. Like what we're creating. So we have to make sure that it's sustainable, not just from an environmental perspective, but then also like, can it manage itself and keep building? There's a reason that we've looked at the website like we have for 20 years, right? Like the World Wide Web, because it's been stable. It's worked for us up until now. So why change it? But there are reasons, we want to get out of this kind of flat, non-community, non-connection way of looking at life. And so that means we have to evolve, but there's nothing like forcing us at this exact moment to do so. So we have to be the change to force ourselves to look at it differently. So I think it sort of answered your question. Then one of the
listen, let's go all over. I love that. And I think that 2 things that I'm pulling out and I want us to talk a little bit more about. One is like starting with yourself and what you love, right? So instead of just starting with the metaverse, what is it that you're really like jazzed about? What really excites you? And then how do you use that to potentially solve problems for the world, solve a problem that you have? And how do you integrate this defining of the metaverse, right? One, taking all that information in, but also the defining in what you love. And so the next thing that I just want to talk about, we started a little bit, Ahna, about like this access piece. I don't even know, there are like hardly any stats that you can pull about like how many women are engaged in the metaverse, this and that. That said, I just know that it's very rare that I am entering a conversation about it and I see a bunch of women or a bunch of non-binary folks or a bunch of anything other than what I would say is like this kind of cis het white male perspective in the larger like story here. So my question, or the conversation I want us to have a little bit, is like, for the women out there, for like what advice do you have? But also, why do you think that there are not more of us in the forefront of this conversation? And what has been your experience of that? I know y'all like, dang, how many questions was that? Who's she asking?
I'm like, what?
You got a lot to say. Start wherever. So Keisha, we'll start with you.
Just like with any industry, I don't think that, unfortunately, this conversation about the metaverse isn't very, very different. When I first got into gaming, I was like, where the women and other types of people? When esports became exceptionally relevant, where are the women and the investors and all of these things? I'm always asking that question about a lot of the spaces that I find myself in. And it's number one, we do have our sexisms and our racisms and our homophobias that exist that have slowed down inclusion in these spaces. But another thing that we can talk about is socialization. And at least from the generation that I've come from, women were not socialized to even consider these spaces for themselves. Number one, we don't see ourselves represented. We're not, and when you don't see yourself represented, you have a hard time knowing that space is safe and welcoming for you. Also, these spaces are filled with jargon, right? So, you're like, oh yeah, the metaverse is going to be interoperabilities and then the non-fungible tokens, and then, and you're just like, what is all this, and when did these words start existing, and why are
these
people
words
using
up?
them? Why are people using them in normal conversation all of a sudden, as if we've always been using these words and this jargon? And it can become really intimidating because you have another group of people who use these words as if they know what they mean. And at every moment, you have to kind of be courageous enough to make a person define what they're saying. Because that's when you kind of get into like the nice, good conversations. When you're like, could you tell me what you mean by that? What does that acronym stand for? Could you give me an example of how that works? And, a lot of people are afraid to ask questions because it makes you look like you don't know, but it actually will save your life. Seriously, just be honest. Do not pretend like you know what you're talking about, and you will catch the fact that a lot of people also don't know what they're talking about. But anyways, the socialization, the lack of representation is intimidating because now you have to go into spaces with very few women or no women. And we, in these last few years, have been accustomed to having safe spaces to kind of run our reps in and get really comfortable. But after we're in those safe spaces, we have to kind of go out into the world and be okay with a little bit of friction, a little bit of conflict. And that's a little scary.
It is.
And yes, so we have to still be courageous, even with all these conversations that we're having. And if we're interested in being in spaces like this, we have to step out there and kind of be okay with some of the things that might be a little bit uncomfortable that come with it. So that's number one. Like, yes, we're still dealing with some social issues and we're still socialized not to see ourselves in these spaces, but we have to fight that at every turn within ourselves and within the groups that, sort of are forming right now, and there's nothing wrong or combative with asking why. Like, where are the women? What does this mean? How can I be a part of it? I was just at a conference the other day, and I was trying to have a gentleman explain to me exactly how his cryptocurrency business helps all demographics. And he just didn't want to talk to me after I made him, after I asked that question. I'm just like, did I ask something wrong? Like, and you got to run your reps. So I'll say that. So
yeah, for sure. I think for me, in a lot of ways, we're having a lot of conversations locally or within like our like town. I live in Austin, Texas, and it's a very tech heavy community, and a lot of people are dealing with crypto, NFTs, all the words you kind of just mentioned, and how we're defining them as well. And so, for us as a business, I would say that we may consider ourselves a thought leader locally, but we definitely are. We may not be seen on like the national stage, which is where you're seeing a lot of like the discussion in the larger places. And so, we've been talking about like, how do we get into those kind of national discussions, right? And like, what is the avenue to get in those meetings? For a lot of our clients, we're able to advise them from the inside, right? I consider myself sometimes more of an entrepreneur than an entrepreneur, just from the sense of like building up internally and educating people through things. But, we are looking at how do we get onto more of that national stage to have that representation. And I don't know that we've necessarily found the right path, but it's just talking to a lot of people and doing things like this where you can kind of meet people that might have ins and outs. And it's the networking and building that community of other women who are going to ultimately help each other and bring people forward with, their businesses who might get you that platform. So, for us, we're having the conversations, but may just not be getting to that kind of national level that we're seeing of a lot of these other thought leaders currently in the world.
So I love what both of you are saying. It makes me think about community, which you just mentioned. And one of the things that I have noticed in the space is someone who has studied crypto, currently Metaverse Web3 for a long time, but has been very scared of like putting myself sometimes in that conversation. But I've done it so much more in this last like year and a half. And what you just so right? Like once I started to like just ask questions and dig, I'm like, well, you still answering these questions too. So I need to do my thing because you answering it, like, but you out here acting like you know all the answers, or people think that you know that, right? So I think there's also a perception that we think other people do, but they also don't. And when they see us ask, at least for me, when I've asked the question, then they're like, that's a good question. Or sometimes they go the other way, but like, that's a good question. And then we can kind of unpack that together in community. And that's what I've been building, right? Like, being in different places, I would say, has done that. What communities, I guess, or how do you build community and connect with people? What suggestions would you have for others out there on how to kind of build community, connect with people so that you can be courageous, get those reps in and do those things, because you can't just do it in isolation. So I'm really curious about how you all have built community, what advice you have, communities that you think people should join, any of those things. So let's just talk about that. And the other reason that I want to talk about that, and I always say 80-20 rule because I don't like to generalize, but 80% of this conversation around community and how women form community is it's almost the flip of what we are seeing in the media about this metaverse conversation. It's like it's like they're creating the thing and then the community comes after, but it's almost like completely opposite when I've been in spaces that have been centered around women. It's like the community and then all of these brilliant ideas come out of it. So I'm just really curious about that. So any thoughts on that? Building community, connecting with others, how you've done it that you'd like to share. Keisha, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So first I want to just talk about time, right? So as each of us as individuals, we have different lives, we have different commitments and responsibilities. So if you're not the person that's building the community, supporting the people who are putting the effort and time into building communities that are safe and enriching for individuals is important. Also understanding that leaders of communities aren't always influencers or celebrities. So I think a lot of times as we get super excited about gaming and metaverse and, all these different like hot topics, we're looking for people who have substantial followers, because that gives us, like a quick idea that those people must know what they're talking about. That's this is a kind of dangerous, because sometimes the loudest voices aren't necessarily building the healthiest communities, nor are they necessarily the people who are using their time to become educated in the space. Because to be an influencer, to be a celebrity, takes a lot of effort in your own public appearance. And, people who are like having their nose down, studying, learning the things, might not be as popular at that particular time. So make sure that as you're building your community, that number one, you don't necessarily have to do it, but support the people that do. And number two, that you're leaving space for people who aren't necessarily already publicly known.
Yep.
Because those people, like the people who are out there but not necessarily popular are worth knowing, and you should seek them out. Like, so the people who are writing papers that are really like sort of doing that sort of deep dive, well-researched journalism, follow those people, support them. That is hard work, to like have to like pull from all this data and then put something together to share with all of us so we can have a better understanding of this space and understanding of where these communities reside. Like to just follow the influencer, follow the famous person, that's fun. But that's when you start hearing about like these rug pulls and these, scams and things of that nature. And you just want to be super careful about who you're following, why you're following them, and how they've come about their information. So if they've been like, an influencer talking about sneakers for 15 years, and then all of a sudden, for the last 2 months, they're talking about the metaverse, just take a breath. Maybe that might not
right?
But that's just my advice.
No, I mean, but that's why we're here, to actually get your advice and to hear about that. One thing that stands out for that, and that I would say as well, is curate a diverse feed across all of your spaces, right? There's this, I don't know where I saw this, but somebody said like, and this is maybe because I'm like in the dating world, I'm like TMI right now, but it's like if you were like dating someone and you ask them, or you just like meet someone and ask them, can I just like see your TikTok for you page? It would tell you like everything about what the algorithm has decided that they pay attention to. And I'm like, whoa, oh my gosh, like what would people think of me if they saw my for you page? That said, with things like this, it's about, are you really diversifying who the people are? And that's what I got from what you said, right? Like cultivate a diverse feed across all of your places, the articles you read, your social media, like whatever Reddit, like hole you're diving down into, really curate a diverse feed. I think that's so important. Thank you for that. Ahna, what do you have to add more to this wonderful conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. For me too, we have a lot of local meetups in Austin, which I really enjoy because there's a lot of people just, talking about it and having that conversation openly versus just like only having to like take your word for it as gospel. Right. And so for that, like having those open conversations in places where you can go find that group locally to have it, especially now as the world opens back up, that's super important. That if for those who are curious, just go join a meetup for, an afternoon, or go hear people talk about it and just start like forming your opinions based on the multiple people you're hearing and not just following that kind of like one source of truth when it comes to kind of this concept as we build this together, right? Like I said earlier. I also, I love a good forum. Reddit is a good one, kind of just getting people's random opinions, and some of them might be conspiracy theories, some of them might be real, but like, again, it's kind of understanding what is out there conceptually around it. Earlier, you were talking about pulling a rug out from under people and like how, maybe with crypto purchasing, and then is it, does it go down and up just based on one person's tweet, I'm personally very nervous to invest my money in that at the moment. And know people are making strides, but I don't understand it enough to do it yet. Right. And I think that's also okay. Right. You can learn about it and try to gain understanding without having to actually, put both feet in, right. Just slowly tiptoe your way through talking to people and understanding and see if it's even right for you, because it's not going to be right for everybody. And I think there's two concepts here too. Like when we talk about, the metaverse, and then we have the other side of like blockchain and cryptocurrency, they really are kind of two different worlds that overlap. And there's definitely like a Venn diagram there, but they're not necessarily synonymous. And so part of that education with talking with people is you'll start to figure that out, is that just to have a more immersive way of thinking about content doesn't mean that I have to have this whole like go buy a, board yacht ape, whatever those things are called, worth $2 million, and then someone stole one, and like, like I don't even know, right? And so like they can be two separate conversations as we continue to educate ourselves. So I just like talking to people about it and seeing what they think, and then let's see if we think the same thing, and if not, then like, well, maybe I learned something new, and being open to that conversation, right? Being open and your ears are listening versus walking into a conversation, your way is the truth and nothing but. Like, that's not a good way for us to build this together and something that's going to be amazing, right? We'll just go back right to the way we are right now, which doesn't change anything, right? So.
So I want to spend the rest of our time talking about things that you're jazzed about, like exciting things that you're working on, or just when you think about the metaverse or the work that you're doing, like what has just really got you super jazzed and excited right now?
I mean, I would have to say the transhumanism is a topic that I'm really like sort of into right now. So what does it mean for us as human beings when we sort of use this technology to enhance our experience, our human experience? So, like, how can we become better people, better human beings through these technologies, right? Like, okay, like I'm hearing all day, all night, how much money we can potentially make and how it's worth trillions and billions and gazillions of dollars. But is this going to make people's lives better somehow? Or is this going to make us better somehow? Are we going to be able to solve some world problems with these emerging technologies? Like, at this point in my life, I got to buy some new clothes and some hot gear, and that's nice. And I'm not going to like lose my sort of passion for fashion necessarily. But I also, look at life, especially after this pandemic, with a lot more value, I guess. The value of my time, value of my relationships, my in real life relationships. So like, yes, when I imagine being in the metaverse, that's time and intention I'm spending there. And, those are sort of maybe parasocial relationships. Those are my digital social media relationships. But when I take that headset off, or if I'm, once I'm away from the screen, is that experience going to follow me to make me better in real life? Is a really important sort of thing I'm thinking about. And I know that question isn't answered yet, but some of the things that are coming out from around that, like I'd be interested to see what meditation looks like, just like really, deep meditation. And I see like Headspace is doing stuff like that, and Calm. And what would that look like in the metaverse? What does a learning sort of platform that's a little bit more enriching, what does that really look like when we refine it? Is education faster in the metaverse? Like, one of my favorite movies obviously is The Matrix, and I used to love
we have a lot to talk about, especially that new one that came out, all of it. I'm like, so
The Matrix was my Star Wars. And it was, like when he got plugged in and he was like, I know Kung Fu, like that kind of element of, science fiction. I wonder, is the metaverse going to bring about something like that? Like I remember in high school, I was a space cadet, and I'd just be daydreaming and fall asleep in class, and I'll fall asleep on my book. And one time my teacher was like, wake up, Keisha. And I made a joke. I was like, I'm learning through osmosis. Like, will the metaverse allow for that?
I know, right? Listen, I'm jazzed about just thinking about it. Ahna, what about you? What are you jazzed about right now?
I'm interested in a different way of getting out of boxes. Like right now, we are in 3 boxes, and it's just it's fine, right? We can still have a conversation. I think we're having a good time. It's a good conversation, right? But like, I feel like there's more to virtual communication than just being stuck in a box. I've always said that the pandemic did one thing for us. It brought everybody up to this level of a box, right? Like my mom knows how to use Zoom now. My grandmother gets Facebook Live in Zoom. Like before, my mom's a teacher. And so when the pandemic hit, she was like calling me every day, like, I can't hear my kids. I'm not sure what's going on. Can you please help me? Like, and so now we all understand it, right? So it gave us this like level set of how we can interact with each other if I can't physically be there with you, especially as we all live more and more apart nowadays, right? And so I'm interested in learning and continuing to build how do we get out of these boxes and create a more interactive way of communicating with each other at not only events, but just with my family, and not even necessarily putting on a headset, like, because we talked about earlier, the entry is low, right? For how many people actually have them. And so, like, what can that look like, and kind of redefining what that human connection looks like? Because I love in-person communication, right? Keisha, like, just exactly what you're saying. Like, we got to continue to do that. But I also know like gaming has done it really well when, if I log into Halo and I start playing and I have my friend from Germany that we get on at the same time when we start playing together, you're building new relationships in a digital community. But now I can only hear him. I can't see him. I've never met him before. Like, what does that ultimately look like? So just kind of rethinking that and redefining it and seeing how, with this concept of the metaverse and this concept of still remaining virtual for both business and pleasure at times, like, what is that going to look like in the future? So it's a bit of that humanism that you're talking about mixed in with a bit of like the digital virtual side. So that's kind of where I'm curious.
So we're drawing to the end of this conversation that literally could probably go on for the whole rest of the day of boot camp if I had it my way, but I don't have it my way. So I would love for both of you to either share a quote or a saying that's really important to you and why. So just like something that's like, a mantra, a quote, a saying that's really important to you and why it's important to you. So whoever's ready to start that, go for it.
Ahna.
Yeah. I feel like I've been asked this question a lot recently.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Then you're ready for it.
Yeah. For me, mine has been no reserve, no retreat, no regret. And so it comes from this gentleman named William Borden, who was ultimately was a missionary, and he went around the world. And his philosophy in life was that no matter what I do, I'm not going to like look back on my life and think I didn't do that. Right. So I'm not going to be reserved. I'm going to be, moving forward, and whatever I believe in, I'm going to, kind of talk about that. No retreat. I'm not going to walk away from a hard conversation just because it's hard, right? I'm going to stick with it. We're going to have the conversation, which I think is, exactly what we're doing right here. We're not retreating from talking about the metaverse because we don't understand it fully, and then no regrets. When I leave or go to bed at the end of the day, I don't look back and say, I really should have said this to somebody, or I should have said my opinion, or I wish I would have asked the question, right? Like, basically the idea is that you're continuing to move forward and that you're making conscious decisions in your life to stick with the hard things. And I think for me, that's especially as you continue in these conversations in your career, like looking back and knowing that I did what I could do, and then the rest was just up to the people around me and the circumstances I was in. So
thank you. Love that. Keisha?
I mean, you caught me off guard with the quote question. I ain't gonna lie. So there's so many that come to mind, but I think my favorite is still the Calvin Coolidge quote, which I never bothered to remember by heart, but I still love this quote, that nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not, genius will not, education will not, persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. So that's not the quote in its entirety, but more or less that's what it is. Yeah. And I really like that because it gives anybody the ability to, win at something, if they're persistent, if they're tenacious, and it doesn't necessarily have to hinge on anything specific, just your ability to keep going. So I really like that Calvin Coolidge quote.
I think people have quotes from both of you that we could use. I love both of the things that you all brought. I thank you so much. I could not leave any conversation about the metaverse without bringing Octavia Butler into the space. And so I realize I don't know very much. None of us knows very much, but we can learn. We can all learn more. then we can teach one another. We can stop denying reality or hoping it will go away by magic. We can stop denying reality or hoping it will go away by magic. That's from Parable of the Sower, Octavia Butler. And like, that's like kind of anytime I talk about metaverse, futures, whatever, got to bring her into the space. So thank you both for being here today. I want to thank everyone for joining in on the panel.